Well, welcome to Ham Radio Perspectives. I'm Tom, WA9TDD.
Yep, and I'm Tom's lifelong ham friend from the Chicago area in the mid-'60s. I'm Quinn, K8QS, living in Michigan now, and we've got back for a second episode of Ham Radio Perspectives, one of the best guests we've ever had. This is going to be fantastic, just like our earlier one was. Our guest is Jim, K1ACT, and Jim has an amazing history in government work, including surveillance, counter espionage. He was with the FBI, did some things for the CIA and beyond. If you want to know more about his background and how ham radio and CW and all led him up into his career doing what he's doing, and he's going to tell you about now, then look at our previous video, which I'm going to link down below. And so we're not going to do a lot with intro of Jim because the story that he's got for us is too fantastic. We don't want to interrupt it. Jim, thank you so much for coming back on. I hope you got some good comments from people after you were on our podcast before.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be back. I've been looking forward to it, to take a few more minutes to extend and expand a little bit about ham radio and the interconnection between ham radio and the kind of work that I did in the FBI. And this is a great opportunity. I received some really nice comments from people who got to see the previous broadcast, and it inspired me to do a little bit more thinking about what else people would like to hear about. So this next story that we'll share with you is an interesting one. I think almost belongs in Ripley's Believe It or Not when we get finished, when we try to tie all of the issues together that we're going to talk about. But today, I'm going to focus a little bit on radio direction finding and ham radio and how direction finding interacted with my job and with my hobby. So basically, I did a little thinking about the 1950s and 60s when, as a young kid and a young ham radio operator, we did have some groups that we got together on weekends, and we would do some fox hunting, as they called it, looking for the hidden transmitters. And in those days, people kind of made their own receivers up, our own equipment to do the direction finding. And the three bands that we focused on were 2 meters, but also, surprisingly enough, we did some DFing on 80 meters and 10 meters. Now, 10 meters was great to do at night. 80 meters was good to do during the day because of propagation, obviously. And kind of 2 meters was good any time of day. But those were the three bands that we would love to play with. And we spent hours on weekends with our own equipment trying to track down these hidden transmitters, basically using signal strength meters. And people would see in our neighborhood funny cars driving around with these weird antennas sticking out the windows and trying to figure out what the hell are these people up to. Well, there was a bunch of young hams out doing a fox hunt and having some fun doing radio direction finding. So my experience goes back to those days. And then all of a sudden, I jump forward to my FBI days, and being in charge of the FBI Signal Intelligence Unit, when I got transferred back to headquarters, radio direction finding became an important aspect of the job as well, because it was a technique that we could use to locate spies. And we had spies who were not only receiving incoming Morse code, but we had some that were sending signals out. And some of them were on the VHF bands talking to satellites, and we suspected that some were using transmitters in the HF bands as well. So we had some capability to do some direction finding. In addition, we had ham radio operators getting trouble around the country. Some of them were causing mischief on some of the bands by blocking and causing interference on some networks, on ham nets. Some of them were creating problems, calling in fraudulent distress messages over the marine radios, causing the Coast Guard to have to go out. The old Communications Act of 1934 created several violations involving radio communications where people could be held criminally responsible for some of the things we were doing. And the FBI had a portion of the responsibility to deal with that. But certainly in my days in the Bureau, we had a close working relationship with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And in a lot of cases that would come into our attention, we would work side by side with the FCC because they had more sophisticated, more experience in doing direction finding and tracking down misuse of transmitters and radio equipment in general. So we always kind of relied on the FCC to be our partner on a lot of those cases. So when I got back to Washington, I was looking at our capability, which was, I'd say, marginal, because we were still dependent on the FCC to provide support to us on some of our cases. Now, around the same time I get there, one day I get a phone call from a friend over at the CIA agency headquarters in Virginia, and he said they were putting together a training package of CIA employees who were going to be trained on the use of some new technology that had just become available. And they thought that the FBI would be interested in doing it. The only problem was that the contract that was with this rather large electronic company down in Southwest Florida, it was only written for CIA employees to receive the training, and it was classified. And so they said, if you want to come, you're going to have to go undercover as a CIA employee to protect not only the CIA and the contract, but to protect the company, because the company would get in trouble providing this kind of training outside of this highly sophisticated sole source contract that we were dealing with. So I said, oh, absolutely. Whatever I need to do, whatever you need to do, whatever backstopping you need to do, I'll be happy to go to this school as a CIA employee. So we made all the arrangements. And the company that was providing the training was a rather large company that did a lot of training in electronics business with many other agencies in the intelligence community. So we make the plans to get together, and there were going to be CIA employees coming in from all over the world. Some of them were living on mountaintops, some were in jungles, some were in deserts, but they all were involved in monitoring electronic signals somewhere, at some frequency and so forth. And it was all fairly super secret what these guys were doing, and nobody was supposed to know each other, but we were just going to come together as a small class and receive this training for this special technology. And so I remember arriving Sunday afternoon at this particular facility. I get checked in, I spend the night, and the agreement was we were all going to get together for breakfast the next morning. And so I met my counterparts, and we all kind of acknowledged who we were. We were like a bunch of cats, not feeling each other out, not sharing a hell of a lot of information, but we knew we were in for a good week of training on this new device. So the idea was we're all going to get together, go down in the cafeteria and have a cup of coffee and some breakfast. So we all kind of go down at our own pace. I walk into the cafeteria, and there's this huge cafeteria, and there's quite a few people sitting around at different tables. And as I'm walking across the floor, I hear somebody say, "Hey, Greenleaf, what the hell are you doing here?" And I look around, because Greenleaf is my last name. So I look around, and here's a table full of FBI agents. And now here I am, my first undercover operation, and I've been blown right away. I look around saying, how did this happen? Well, it turns out they were there, unbeknownst to me, receiving training on other equipment at the other end of the facility. In the meantime, I'm looking around to see where the CIA guys are, and they're over at their table. And I said, well, the best defense is a good offense. So I go over to this table with the CIA guys, and I knew most of them. And I look at them and say, hey, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not who you think I am. And I turn around and walk away with a very stern look on my face. And I think they got the message that they weren't supposed to recognize me. But anyway, I got over to the table with the agency people, and fortunately, nobody had picked up on it. So we continued on with with the next week with me pretending to be a CIA employee, but I figured this was not a good sign if we were going to start off this way with all of this great training, and I was blown out of the water within the first 20 minutes of being there. But anyway, that's just a little aside to the story. The bottom line, though, is we had access to a new piece of equipment that I'll call the black box. And this equipment was designed to monitor frequencies from 1 megahertz all the way up to 500 megahertz. There's one wide open front end on this piece of equipment, and it was tied to another black box. Now, the black box that it was tied to was the antenna. And what made this package so unique is that this antenna always would stay inside the automobile. There would be nothing exposed outside the automobile. Now, in those days, we had cars that had long glass sloping windows in the back. They had a shelf in the back. So this black box would be sitting on the shelf in the back of the automobile, looking out through the glass. So there were nothing exposed. And so we learned to use that equipment. And basically what it provided to us was not only the signal strength of the incoming signal, but the direction of arrival of the signal. So I had meters in front of me and equipment in front of me on the receiver that would basically give me the direction of arrival of the signal and the signal strength. And between the two, and then maybe triangulating with another black box and another automobile or an aircraft, in a matter of almost minutes, you could pretty much identify the location of the hidden transmitter, we'll say. So we spent the whole week there learning this new equipment, and I'm saying to myself, I can't believe I have this job. Ham radio operator, having access to this wonderful equipment, and to have a job where I can use my knowledge of ham radio and the Morse code to go out and help catch spies and or people who are out committing criminality involving the airwaves. So that's how we kind of got, that's the base part of my story.
And one question, Jim, just before you go ahead, can you tell us how it was possible to have the antenna inside the automobile without the metal of the automobile causing all kinds of effects?
No.
Okay.
That's the classified part of the story. But what I will say is that it was amazing technology. It was some new developing software that they had created. It actually had an ability to deal with reflection of signals off buildings. It was able to take all of these things into consideration and to give you a fairly accurate number that would suggest the direction of arrival.
Fantastic. Okay, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So here I am in Washington. A few months go by, and all of a sudden we get a phone call from our Portland, Oregon office saying that they have a case out there in which an individual was blowing up high tension towers, these huge steel towers that carried the electrical energy from the Bonneville Dam to the city of Portland. And these cables were capable of providing electricity to about 900,000 people. And they had received a letter, an extortion letter from an individual who said he had blown up several of these towers and he wanted $1 million from the Bonneville Power Administration and the city government of Portland, Oregon. He wanted $1 million, and he was going to blow up more towers. Well, they weren't sure if he was telling the truth or not. They sent up a fixed-wing aircraft or helicopter to go up and check the line that was running from the Bonneville Dam towards the city, and they found 5 or 6 power towers that had been blown, the bases had been blown up, and the cables, some of them were laying on the ground. So we knew this was a serious case, this was a serious matter, and this guy wasn't BSing us. He knew what he was doing. But the thing that really got interesting was he decided that he didn't want anybody to hear his voice, he wrote over a period of about 2 weeks a series of letters giving us instructions on how we were to deal with him and how he was to get the $1 million package. And he decided that he was going to use a CB radio, a handheld CB radio, and he was going to, rather than speak into the microphone, he was going to use what they call a duck whistle. And he took a duck whistle that hunters use, and he would blow into the microphone on his CB radio using Morse code, long and short tones from the duck whistle. And so the Morse code that he was sending, in these letters, he sent with it a listing of what certain letters and numbers would mean, and they all related to intersections of streets and sections of town, so that when he blew the duck whistle and transmitted those tones in Morse code, then we would know what streets that he was talking about where he wanted the package to be left off. And that way, nobody could hear his voice, and he thought he would be pulling a fast one over on law enforcement and get away with $1 million.
And he's doing this on the CB band.
He's doing this on Channel 9, which was the standard, I believe, calling channel on the CB radios. So they call us and say, hey, we need help. We don't know what's going on. Well, in the meantime, I'm saying to myself, this is great. Now I can maybe use my new technology that I learned from the agency. The only problem was the rules of engagement with the agency simply said, I cannot use this equipment on a criminal case. I can only use it on an intelligence case where there would be no trials or anything. This is counterintelligence, intelligence type of equipment, not to be used on criminal cases. But they said, we'll talk to the DCI, the head of the CIA, and see if we can get his permission so you can use this equipment, because this is a pretty serious case that you have out there on the West Coast. Well, the head of the CIA gave me permission to use this equipment, provided that it would never be disclosed in criminal court and that it would be hidden away from anybody so they couldn't see what it was and how it worked. And I promised him that we would do that. So this all happened within a day or two. The next thing I know, I'm on an airplane with another agent that I worked with, and we're flying to Portland, Oregon, and we've got these magic boxes with us, and we're going to go out there and we're going to set up shop. And what was happening, the bad guy wanted to have 2 or 3 trial runs of him using the CB radio as he drove around. And by the way, the area that we're talking about was around the base of Mount Hood and probably 50 or 60 miles inland into the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. So it was a pretty good area, pretty widespread area that he was driving around as he was transmitting through the CB radio. So we get out there and we find out that he's going to come up as part of the schedule that he had sent in an extortion letter. The next day around 10 o'clock in the morning, he was going to come up and he was going to send some practice signals out to us so we could check the addresses to see where the money was supposed to be dropped. What he was really doing was he was doing this, and then he was going to surveil us to see if any police cars or anybody were in around the area. So he wanted to see how safe he was going to be for the drop-off. And of course, the address that he was going to we were supposed to drop the money off, he wouldn't tell us that until later. But these were kind of practice intersections of road that we were to go to. So I met with the head of the FBI office in Portland and with several of the agents who were working the case, who were out on the road doing surveillance and doing some things. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to get a fixed wing aircraft. We're going to rent a plane, and we're going to put one of our black boxes up in an airplane. And the agent that was with me, he had been trained on how to use the black box. I had trained him. So he was going to go up in the plane, and I was going to be in an automobile down on the ground, driving around with an agent from the office, because we were both armed, because we didn't know what we were going to run into. And the idea was to see how this new equipment would work in this this FBI car that looked like an ordinary car with this black box sitting on the back shelf in the glass. Now, in the meantime, because we had close ties with the FCC, we also had invited FCC to be involved in some of the direction finding situations. And of course, they were using like old World War II type spinning loops, these big loops that were sitting on the roof of their vans and on their cars, because they're used to going after ham radio operators who are misusing or abusing the frequencies, or other characters who are misusing radios in support of criminal activity. They were very good at what they did, but the problem was when they were driving around, everybody would look at them and wonder, what the hell are these guys doing with these weird loop antennas sitting on the roof? So what we did was we invited them into the case and asked them to cover an area where there was the least likelihood of the subjects appearing, but we wanted them to be there to be part of the process. So we go out, and within about 40 minutes of us being on the road, the subject comes onto the CB channel 9, sending his Morse code signal with the duck whistle. And at the moment he did that, the plane was overhead. And the next thing I know is I get a message from the aircraft giving me the direction of arrival and the relative signal strength, which put the bad guy in his car probably within a mile of where I was. So now I knew that we were in an area where this guy could be located. At the same time, I measured the signal strength and saw the direction of arrival on my little box at the same time the airplane was doing it. So I start heading to this area that we thought the car was in. We pull up to an intersection, and as we're sitting there, an automobile comes from the right-hand side of us, stops at the stop sign, and makes a right-hand turn in front of us. As he does, I notice the driver's window is down, and I see this long chrome whip antenna hanging out the window of the car, and I see the driver tilted in the driver's seat with a CB handy-talkie in his hand. He made a turn right in front of us. As he was broadcasting, he nearly blew my damn ears off because the S meter on the radio came warping up against the side, and the tones nearly made me deaf because we were so close to him. And now I look at the agent beside me and I said, we don't have any choice. We got to take this guy down. This is him. And we noticed there was a woman sitting beside him, and it looked like a kid in the back seat. So we get on the radio and we advise everybody, we have the subject in sight and we're going to do a felony stop. We're going to pull him off the road with guns drawn, and we're going to need backup help right away because everybody else was kind of spread around the area. So we take off after this guy, and within a couple of 100 yards, we're beside him. We force him off the side of the road. The driver, he jumps out. He's got his gun drawn. I'm sitting in the passenger side. I open the door. I have my gun out, and I jump out of the car. And as I do, I realize, damn it, I forgot to take my headphones off, and I nearly ripped one of my ears off as we're jumping out the door with guns drawn to arrest these characters. So finally, the headphones come off. I get out of the car. We get around, and we make the arrest. And it turns out that the CB radio was on his lap. The duck whistle was sitting on the seat beside him. His wife was beside him, and I think she had a rifle in her lap. The kid in the back seat, I'm not sure if he had a weapon or not, but fortunately, we overwhelmed them so quickly that they did not put up a fight. So we were able to arrest them and get them outside of the car, and we had them on the ground as we were putting handcuffs on them. And about that time, the backup agents and the police departments all show up. And we were really thankful to see them there. So now I'm saying to myself, the media is going to be here, and everybody and their brothers showing up because we made this arrest all of a sudden. We've solved this major case in a matter of almost minutes of being able to use these classified boxes. How am I going to back away now to make sure that nobody sees how we did it or how we did it? So we came up with a game plan where we told everybody, we gave FCC complete credibility, and we said FCC did a hell of a job for us and got us into this area. And just so happened the guy turned in front of us. So the credit all went to the FCC, and we were able to pull back and disappear into the woodwork. And so nobody ever really knew about what we were doing and how we did it. And it turns out that the subject, his wife, and the kid obviously were involved. He was a former Vietnam veteran who was upset with the system, and he didn't like the way that veterans were being treated after coming home from Vietnam. And he wanted to take this $1 million and use it to help support veterans in the area that needed help. But anyway, we made the arrest, and we were able to protect the equipment, and nobody knew how we did it, simply that it went down. And of course, we all looked like heroes, and FCC got all the credit for doing the direction finding to make the case come to a positive conclusion. So from that day forward, all the media, everything talked about this case and how the FCC was so helpful, and that the FBI agents had flooded the area with surveillance cars. And this guy never had a chance once he started broadcasting with his CB radio. So that was a very good ending to the story. But about 3 years later, somebody comes into my office and says, "Hey, you won't believe what just came out in True Detective magazine." It was some crazy newspaper out of New York. I think it was called True Detectives. They had the headline story, "CIA box captures Bonnie Bomb killer in 1973 in Portland, Oregon." And it was one of these wild stories that was so crazy and so wild, nobody believed it. And it was we never commented on it. Now, what is really interesting now is that this morning I was doing a little bit of research to kind of refresh my recollection on how fox hunting took place and how active was ham radio and radio direction finding. How active is it today? Do hams still do it? Are they really as interested and active as it was back in the years when I did it? In the first article I open up, it's announcing a major national, international amateur radio direction finding contest to be held in 2 weeks, August 12th through the 16th of 2026, 2 weeks from now. And the contest is going to be held at the base of Mount Hood in Portland, Oregon, and people were coming in from all over the country and world to do this direction finding contest in the same damn area where we had made the arrest and used our direction finding equipment 52 years ago.
Oh,
Can you believe
man.
that?
I can't believe it. Do you have any idea how that magazine got the real story?
Not really. However, that said, because there were so many people involved in that investigation, because there was a task force, we had FBI, we had the FCC people, you had the sheriff's office, you had local police departments. So everybody was involved. And of course, there was a lot of talk about the fact that he had a CB radio and there was some direction finding going on by government people. And again, everything was pointing towards the FCC. So the only thing that we could think of is that there was somebody, some police officer or somebody in the background who knew more about the story than anybody else and probably made a few bucks on the side to leak the story to True Detective magazine. I let the CIA know about the story, and we all kind of got a big laugh out of it because nobody believed in a million years that the CIA classified equipment would ever be used in a criminal case in the United States. I might point out a little bit more about the background about the relationships between the agencies, because most of the equipment that I used during my time in the engineering section when I was doing the intercepting of the signals coming in from Russia, the Morse coded messages, and what little direction finding cases we had, most of the equipment that I used was purchased or given to us by other agencies. And the reason for that is that there's no reason for the FBI to go out and spend millions of dollars on research and development to develop a device that was unique just to FBI operations, when another agency who has a similar mission, but not in this country, they had the same needs. And they took the lead on developing some of this sophisticated equipment. So rather than the FBI spending money and the CIA spending money and NSA spending money, there was generally some agency that took the lead on a piece of equipment, so that when eventually it was designed and built and made available, we were all able to share in it, and we were able to use it, although we had to use different rules, obviously, to have access to it. But in this case, that particular piece of equipment, I never did get a chance to use it on a major case like that, but that equipment could very easily be used to root out an agent in this country who was using transmitters from his house to either talk up to satellites or talk on HF to other parts of the world. So that equipment we could put in an FBI car and drive around, and nobody would have any idea, what we were doing. And there are other pieces of equipment that we would use that were built and obtained most efficiently by some lead agency, but that one piece of equipment could be shared, the technology could be shared amongst all of us, again, to save the taxpayers a lot of money. And we did, and that's a good example of a piece of equipment that we were able to do.
Yeah, and just to clarify on this, Jim, for everybody, the reason they didn't want you using that on a criminal case was because a criminal case is going to have to bring all kinds of information about the case in, including how you found these people, what equipment you used, and all.
Absolutely.
And you don't want that with a criminal case,
No, in fact, that's the only reason, because once you go to trial, then all of the information associated with that case as to how it was solved and so forth would have to be made available to the defendant and to the courts, and rightfully so. That's the system. So it was really important that, because it did not impact on the actual evidence of the case, it only helped us and promoted us finding and identifying the subject. And so that's not part of the real trial in reality. So the idea was just low-key it, get it out of the area, give them somebody else the credit, and let's move on. But that black box, I can't imagine what the technology is today. We're talking September and October of 1973. And I'll tell you about another little black box that I had that was kind of fascinating. It was a shortwave radio that would monitor 1 megahertz through 30 megahertz, had a BFO in it. It could had tremendous sensitivity. It was probably one of the finest shortwave radios I had ever listened to. And it was the size of a package of cigarettes. So that was 1970s technology. So again, I'm a dinosaur now in the business. I've been retired for a few years. I can look back with great memories like this particular case and the kind of equipment that I had access to. But it was a wonderful experience. But more importantly, it's amazing how ham radio, Morse code, interacted with my whole career and made available to me situations where I was able to demonstrate and use the technology and take advantage of those special relationships. Because you hear a lot of things, you read a lot of things about relationships between agencies, and the CIA is not getting along with the FBI, and NSA is upset with the CIA or whatever. But at the working level and mid-management levels, the farther away you get from Washington, D.C., the better the relationships are.
I get it.
And it's true. So
That's-
I got to meet some really great patriots because the guys who are going to take their black boxes back to where they came from, they were scattered all over the world, living in as I say, on mountaintops and in jungles and in deserts. And they were going to use that to try to track down intelligence targets and collect information for the U.S. intelligence community.
Yeah, well, as one of our commenters said, you may have read some of the comments on your last video with us, that you yourself are a national treasure. And I think what you're doing with us on our channel here and telling these stories is helping to give citizens in the United States, especially, a sense that the government has wonderful people in it doing some fantastic work with top-notch technologies way beyond what we know, given what you already had back there in the 60s and 70s. And so it's so fun. And Jim, I want you to think about the next story, because we're going to keep doing these with you as long as you have some good stories to tell where you're not going to get into trouble, because you're getting in.
Just think about all these ham radio operators who are going to all of a sudden show up in 2 weeks to the base of Mount Hood, and there'll be dozens of them. They come from all over the world. It's
Right.
a very fancy contest. There are prizes. This is serious business of trying to locate these transmitters. They have no idea that 50 years earlier, we had used radio direction finding, Morse code, to solve a major case involving 3 people. By the way, the case never did go to trial. He pleaded guilty. His wife pleaded guilty. He was sentenced. And this all, believe it or not, this all happened within 30 days of the time he was arrested. He pleaded guilty and was sent to prison for 20 years. His wife got 10 years. The kid was an innocent bystander. But this case was wrapped up, and these 2 clowns were in prison about a month and a half after the case went down and it was solved. So it was but I'm just sitting here thinking about all these people coming into Portland, Oregon for this great direction finding contest, not realizing what the scene was like 52 years ago.
Same spot.
Playing up in the air, checking out.
Yeah, it's wild.
Channel 9.
Absolutely wild. You're great, Jim. We'll do another one with you. Think about that. I'll get in touch with you too to see what kind of comments you get. I know beyond the comments that people put publicly on our channel, you had some email going into you, which is great. So let's wrap this up for now. This is Ham Radio Perspectives, and you've just heard the story here from our buddy Jim, K1ACT. You can look him up on QRZ if you want to send him an email. And his service for this country has just been spectacular. And so these 2 videos, this one and then the earlier one we did on how ham radio helped him initially with his career and all, put a link down below. Hope you'll watch that as well. So I'm going to say 73 to you all. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Subscribe to the channel. And my name is Quinn. I'm K8QS.
I'm Tom, WA9TDD, and I've got great ideas for a duck call.
Okay. And you also see here our buddy Jim, K1ACT.
73s, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.